why would you pass Michelle Bradley? Why would you pass a student that you're talking about who's reading at a third grade level and give them a diploma? And the answer is simple. The answer is money. And one of the things that I didn't realize in 2017 when I started this job, and is when I did realize it, it was one of the main things that convinced me to write this book, is school systems do not receive money to educate kids. That is not why they get money. The incentive is to enroll the child, not educate them.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy Keys. We are excited today for today's host that we have, Chris Papst, who has recently written a book, The Failure Factory. Now, I know that many of our listeners are parents of dyslexic, ADHD kids, and we have seen how the school system, public education, has sometimes failed our students. And so Chris has a very interesting perspective that he is going to share with us. And that's why I thought this was relevant and vital information that everyone needs to know. So welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're excited to just kind of dive right in. My first question is, how did this book come about?
Sure. So in it was 2016, and I was an investigative reporter working for the ABC News affiliate in Washington, D.C. And I got a call from the company that owns that station, which is Sinclair Broadcast Group. And they reached out and they said, we're going to start this new thing called Project Baltimore at our Fox affiliate, Fox 45 in Baltimore. Do you want to be part of it? And so what Project Baltimore is that we're a team of five. We're two producers, two photographer editors, and myself as the reporter. And we started in January of 2017. And what we do is we focus on one topic. And for the past 9 years and a couple months, we've been focusing on one topic, and that is all that we report on. The idea was it's sort of like a return to the local investigative journalist beat reporters from 30 or 40 years ago. And that was kind of the idea. And it was an idea that we launched in 2017, and it was a great success, and we're still doing it today. And the one topic that we chose to cover was public education. And the reason we chose public education was because at the time we could see, and this is specific to Baltimore City, that according to federal data in 2017, Baltimore City Schools was one of the most funded, but one of the lowest performing large school systems in America. And it had been that way for many, many years. And that is why we chose to pick Baltimore City. Now, 9 years later, we've expanded, and Project Baltimore covers public education throughout the state of Maryland. But after 9 years, I wrote Failure Factory because what we have uncovered in these 9 years, there's most all of it is what I didn't know in 2017 about public education after devoting 50 hours a week of my professional life into doing this. And I wrote the book because I figured that if I didn't know a lot of these things, that there's a lot of other people that don't know a lot of these things about how the school systems are actually run and what the incentive structure is and where the money is going and how data is manipulated and how kids are graduating who can't read. How does that happen? Well, Failure Factory tells you how all that is happening.
And I think you hit upon a word, system. It's like schools have become institutions where they have a life of their own. So making change and everything else becomes impossible or next to impossible. Common sense just doesn't seem to be there.
Well,
So
making the
talk.
change is certainly harder. And the reason it's harder is because we have created a system where a lot of people are making a lot of money. And those people don't want the system to change because they're making very healthy six-figure salaries. They have good pensions. They have their summers off. They have their weekends and holidays off. They have very good health care, all of which we're paying for. So what we've sort of done as taxpayers is that we have created this behemoth that in many ways is serving itself before it's serving us and our kids. And it's sort of gotten out of control. And the point of Failure Factory is to educate people to put us back in control, put the parents back in control, put taxpayers back in control.
Absolutely, and that's one of the phenomena that we are seeing across the nation is parents are pulling their kids out. If you look at the percentages of homeschooling, it is on the rise. Now, perhaps, and everyone will say, "Well, yes, but that's because of COVID." There's more going on here. And I have a couple of questions for you because I think they really get at some of the issues that you have uncovered for that. And I
Sure.
think that before I even ask the questions, one of the things, if we really think about what schools were established to, we had an urban population and we needed factory workers. So we needed to be able to educate them to a level that they could be productive members in an industrialized system or society. We moved from agricultural based to industrial based. And then somewhere along the line, things started going wrong. So let's say one of the things I'd love if you could talk a little bit about Michelle Bradley. Now, here is a parent who couldn't read in the ninth grade, graduated, and then, oh my goodness, all of a sudden, lo and behold, at 39, she discovers that she's dyslexic. So, could you tell me a little bit about that?
So what Failure Factory is it's a book about the 9 years that we've been covering Baltimore City schools and Maryland schools. And the way that I really formulate the book is I'm showing you data and I'm using the data to show you what is really going on in the school systems. Because oftentimes when we look at school data, we look at it 1 year and then 3 years later we see something, and then 5 years later we see something. Well, this is a long term study looking at all the data over 9 years. And when you look at that, it is really alarming as per how much money is going in and what the parents and students are getting in return as far as academic outcomes. And what makes Failure Factory different than a lot of other books about education is that I interview the people who make up the data. And Michelle Bradley is one of those people. And she had reached out to us because she was watching our Project Baltimore reports. And she had said that, she made it to high school in Baltimore City schools and she can't read. And she now has two kids that are attending Baltimore City schools. And, as I'm doing this book tour and as I'm talking to people about Failure Factory, a lot of people blame parents. And I understand that. And parents are obviously hugely influential in their child's upbringing and their education. But most people don't understand what's going on in many of our inner city schools like Baltimore, where you have a parent, a single parent like Michelle Bradley, who cannot read. How is she supposed to help her kids with their homework? How is she supposed to try to make sure that they are not going to repeat the cycle of poverty that that Michelle is stuck in? In the book, I go into detail about where she lived, and she was in a very struggling section of a struggling city, Baltimore. She lived in government housing, the type of government housing that very few people are actually aware exists, where she can't even open windows because they're shut, they're screwed shut, where she can't control her own thermostat. And a lot of people that like to blame parents, I would like to take them to visit somebody like Michelle Bradley, where the only thing she can really do is to make sure her kids go to school, which they did. But once her kids are in that school, if they're not receiving the proper education, Michelle can't help them. And she didn't get the proper education. So her children are now attending the same schools that undereducated her. And there are thousands or tens of thousands of parents in Baltimore City. And we talked to many of them in Failure Factory that are living that life. And Michelle didn't get diagnosed, as you mentioned, with dyslexia until she was 39. The school system kept pushing her through, pushing her through, pushing her through until she got to high school and she can't read and then she drops out. And what are the chances that she has to have a successful life monetarily and professionally? It's greatly diminished. And did the school system just not care to try to diagnose her dyslexia? Did they not try to? Or is there not an incentive structure in a public school system to even do that? And for Michelle, she was failed. She was part of the failure factory, and she's desperately hoping that her children are not.
Right, because we as parents put trust in schools that they are going to do one thing, and that is teach kids how to read. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, what you just described, I mean, I'm an Orton-Gillingham tutor. And last year, I was tutoring a student who was actually graduated. They graduated the student who could not read above a third grade level. And
Yeah.
I was then tutoring them intensively to make up for what the schools should have done. So, like, do kids, are they held back anymore? Like, what happens? What did you find out there?
It's very rare that a child is held back. And you may ask, if a child isn't mastering the material in a grade, why would a school push that child on to the next grade? Because if they're behind in third grade, they're going to be farther behind in fourth, farther behind in fifth, farther behind in sixth. And the one thing that we've noticed in the 9 years that we've been doing Project Baltimore, and what the book really tries to relay to readers, is that all you have to do is follow the money. The money will answer why school systems do what they do. So, why would you push a kid through? Why would you pass Michelle Bradley? Why would you pass the student that you're talking about who's reading at a third grade level and give them a diploma? And the answer is simple, the answer is money. And one of the things that I didn't realize in 2017 when I started this job, and is when I did realize it, it was one of the main things that convinced me to write this book, is school systems, and just hear me out here as I say this, school systems do not receive money to educate kids. That is not why they get money. They get money to enroll kids. A school's incentive is to enroll a child, not educate a child. When that concept was first proposed to me, it was really hard to believe, but it's true. And that is how Maryland works. And that is how many states, if not all states around this country, work. The incentive is to enroll the child, not educate them. And that is why many kids, like the one you mentioned, or Michelle Bradley, or the many kids I interview in this book, why it's still happening today. Because if you continue to push a child through who is not receiving the education, that child is still more likely to stay enrolled because they're going to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And that light is called a high school diploma. Even if they cannot read the diploma that is being handed to them, the school system still gets the money. Now, I interview teachers in this book that tell me they have graduated students who cannot read the diploma that was given to them. And it happens, and all you have to do is follow the money for the reason.
Now, is this state money, federal money, both? Because
It's all
is the
free.
state evaluated on the percentage that they have enrolled?
So the way that a school system is structured, Baltimore City, for example. Now, Baltimore City is a little different because Baltimore City in Maryland is about 70% funded by the state, 20% funded by Baltimore City, and about 10% funded by the federal government. Most schools in Maryland and most schools around the country are not funded to those extremes. So many of the school systems are in this area are more like 50% local, 40% state, and then 10% federal government. But usually the
Yep.
federal government makes up between 8 and 10% of a school system's funding. So when a child is enrolled, they're getting money from the state, the local, and the federal government. And to the extent that this is happening and that school systems are only worried about enrolling kids, there's a story that I tell in Failure Factory where we found a student who was in jail and somebody was enrolling him in school. Now, think about that for a second. So now you have taxpayers that are paying to keep somebody in jail and paying a school to educate a child who is not there. So this was part of a larger uh, enrollment. We called them ghost students, a larger ghost student
Right.
investigation that we had done that takes up a few years of this book. And after we did these investigations, and we proved that there were many, many kids, thousands statewide, that were being falsely enrolled. There were no criminal charges. Nobody, to my understanding, ever went to jail or was ever put in handcuffs. But to make an argument that that's theft of taxpayer dollars, I think is a really strong argument to make. But the way that the laws are written surrounding public education is the incentive is to enroll the kid. And if you get, let's say, caught, we'll use the word caught, falsely enrolling people, it's usually just seen as some sort of sloppy bookkeeping, and then everybody just moves on.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, another question that I have is you talk about IEPs. And so that's definitely of interest to our listeners
Mhm.
because many of the children or the parents have children with IEPs. Talk to me a little bit about what you uncovered or what you saw related to special education, IEPs, and so forth.
Well, overall, it's an absolute mess, and it's sad, and it's discouraging, and it's frustrating. And the, for Project Baltimore, we have a tip line. And we encourage people to reach out to us. And that's how we get a lot of our reports that are in this book. And a lot of the people that I talk to, the parents, the students, the educators, the administrators, a lot of them reach out to us through our tip line. And the two most common concerns that we get in public education is violence, bullying, things like that.
Mhm.
And two is IEPs, that they're not being followed and they're not being honored. And this is an enormous problem, and so enormous. Just in August, just what was that, 7, 8 months ago, we had done a series of stories in Prince George's County Public Schools. And that's the second
Ooh.
largest school system in Maryland, probably the 15th largest in America. Very large school system, I think around 150,000 kids. And we had found, because we were filing public records requests, that there were 80 students who, in their IEPs, required a one-to-one aid and did not have one.
Mhm.
And the reason we were doing these stories is because there was a student named Bowen Levy who required a one-to-one aid in his IEP, did not have one, and ended up swallowing a glove at school and dying. And so that's what caused us to do this investigation. And we found that Prince George's County Schools, which has roughly a $3.5 billion budget, was not hiring one-to-one aides for 80 kids that required them. We did the story. It got a lot of attention, obviously, as it should. Nobody was fired. Nobody was held accountable. Just business as usual. Let's move on. And that's so often what we see in the schools is that they get the taxpayer money to deliver services for students with disabilities, but they don't deliver the services. And when they don't deliver those services, no one's held accountable. And when you have a school system like Prince George's County that's so big and so rich, they have very good attorneys. And what are parents supposed to do? Like, how are they supposed to go after the school system and try to hold a $3.5 billion school system accountable, especially in a place like Prince George's County that has a lot of poverty? Places like Baltimore City, where 28% of the kids are living in poverty. And more than that, a lot of the parents are like Michelle Bradley that are drastically undereducated. What are they supposed to do? And the answer is they can't do anything. And that's what's really frustrating for me is that they reach out to me because I'm their only hope. And I'm not saying that with any type of pride. I'm saying that because it's sad, actually, that the parents have to reach out to the media to get the story out there because the schools aren't held accountable. Nobody's holding them accountable, especially for students with disabilities.
And what was the answer? I will say that since COVID, I know that it is more difficult sometimes to hire aides because we don't pay them anything. It's
Yeah.
really it's pitiful
And
what
they
they
have hard
get paid
jobs.
for. Yeah.
They have tough jobs. Yeah, they have really
So
hard
what
jobs.
did this
Well, here's what happened.
was there an answer? What did the
There
school
was
say
an
anything?
answer. So I went to the state superintendent of schools. I went to the federal government because this is IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities
Mhm.
Education Act, that they're violating. But the federal government doesn't investigate IDEA violations. The state does. That's always been that way. And so the federal government's like, we can't do anything. And the state government's like, we can't do anything. And we go to the local government and they just don't really care. So what happened was we just kept doing stories on it and essentially embarrassed them. And as we sit here today, all 80 of those kids now have one-to-one aids because we shined a spotlight on it. And we largely called the school system out and said, what are you doing? There's a dead kid in the school system right next to you because he didn't have a one-to-one aid and you're not doing it. But the problem is the problem got solved until they just do the same thing again, and someone's going to have to alert us about it or we're not going to know. And that's such it's so sad and it's so unfortunate. And the other thing that's important to note is that there was a state law that was drafted this legislative session in Annapolis in Maryland to force Prince George's County School to hire the one-to-one aides that are necessary. Now think about that for a second. There's a
Law.
state law written for a school system to follow federal law. I mean, wrap your head around that for a moment. Now, the law didn't pass. The law didn't even come up for a vote. Annapolis killed the bill. So a bill was actually put forth to hold a school system accountable, and the lawmakers in Annapolis didn't pass it. Didn't even vote on it. It didn't even get a vote in committee. It was ignored.
Right, because it would have been really expensive for them to follow the law. Amazing how things work, right?
But they already have $3.5 billion. And as we were doing these stories, we were talking to people. And Prince George's County, where this was happening, they have a dedicated student with disability administrator, like a regional superintendent or deputy superintendent, something like that. That person makes probably as much money as 5 to 8, maybe 10 one-to-one aides. And people were saying, this person's not doing their job. So why don't we fire them, hire the aides with that money, and then put it in? But that's so much of what we're seeing in public education is that the administrative state is gigantic. It is very top heavy, and a lot of the money isn't getting to the kids. And even the money that does get to the kids, like we're talking about right now, there's no accountability for how that money is spent, unless there's somebody like me or someone like Project Baltimore that is willing to do media stories on this and put people on TV and on social media saying, hey, what are you doing here? This isn't right.
Correct. Like, this is wrong. Absolutely. And shine a spotlight on it. So I always like to leave the listeners with a little bit of hope because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, everyone is going through a journey and it's different for everyone. It has ups and downs, emotional highs and lows, and everything else. But I think it's really important to offer a glimmer of hope. So, is there anything that you could, after everything that you've investigated, there's got to be at least one thing that would offer a glimmer of hope that you could share with the listeners?
There's a lot of hope. Like public schools are struggling right now, and we know that. We can see nationally, and this book is Baltimore centric, but what's happening in Baltimore is happening throughout the entire country, and we know that. We can see the data, and we can see enrollment is going down while the number of people employed in public schools, the amount of money going to public schools is drastically increasing, but student achievement is going down. Like, there's a huge problem. But the hope is, and what we are seeing is that this has been going on for so long. And books like mine are educating a lot of people on what the problem is. And in many parts of the country, there are shifting attitudes, and we're seeing it. Arizona has 3 years ago adopted universal school choice. Now, I'm not going to
Mhm.
say that universal school choice is the absolute solution, but I do believe it's part of the solution. Florida has done the same thing. We're seeing drastic increases in states like Tennessee. I'm sorry, Mississippi, a lot of southern states are making these changes, a science of reading, and all these other things where parents are fed up. As you mentioned, there's more homeschooling because parents are pulling their kids out of public school. There's more there's like the idea of micro schools, and there's generally more charter schools that are opening. Not in Maryland because Maryland doesn't like charter schools, but a lot of other states are doing that. In the big beautiful bill that passed last year, there's a private school investment voucher that
Yeah.
believe 28 or 29 states have already opted into. And what that voucher does is that parents can apply for it, and their tax write offs for the people that invest into it. Parents can apply for it. They can get a voucher that they can use for their child's education. It can be homeschooling, it can be private school, parochial school, Catholic school, it could be a charter school. These ideas are really starting to take root, especially in redder states. Where I am in bluer states, they're still clinging on to the model that's 100 years old, and they don't want to release that model. They don't want to get away from it. And it goes back to what we talked about 20 minutes ago, is because there's a lot of money in it, and the people that are making that money, they want to keep making that money. But there is hope. Good
Thank you.
things, good things are happening. We're seeing it across the country. And by good things, I mean that parents are getting more options on how their children are being educated. Michelle Bradley, she has no options in this state. She's stuck. She is absolutely stuck. Her children are stuck. But many other states and many other people are looking at that going, we don't want that here. We want Michelle Bradley. We want the Michelle Bradleys of the world to be able to have options. And it really just takes us, it takes voters, it takes taxpayers, it takes parents to vote for the people that want to see that change, and that's really all that it takes. It's not really that difficult. You got to be very, very conscientious of who your local administrators are, the local politicians, I should say. Local school board, pay attention to your local school board candidates. They are immensely important and valuable. Your local legislators, your state senate, your state house. Most of us, we get really excited and vote for president. But I would argue that the president, unless you're in the military, has a much lower impact on your life than your school board member, because your school board member is determining your housing value, is determining your crime rates, is determining the quality of your local economy. Are the people that are graduating, can they read and write? Do they have the math skills? The president's not controlling that. Your local school board is. So put more thought into your local school board and make sure that your state house and your state senate representatives, ask them, are you just going to give my money to the local school system and look the other way? Or are you going to hold them accountable for the academic outcomes? And in more and more states, we are seeing that schools are being held to a higher standard, and it needs to happen more. So that's the hope. The hope is there. We can save our public schools. We have to save our public schools. We don't have a
Mhm.
choice. Our future is going to look pretty dim if we don't. And I really wrote Failure Factory to give people the pathway on how to do it. And I'm so grateful for you to have me on your show, and thank you.
Absolutely. And in the vein of full disclosure, I will let you know I am a member of my local school board. So
Oh,
I
you
get
are.
it. Absolutely. And we had to put in new reading programs because the results were horrific. So change is possible. It absolutely is.
It is.
So, where can people find your book?
Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future can be found anywhere: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads. Your local bookstore should have it. If they don't, they can certainly order it. And I wrote this book, and I'm sitting here, and I'm speaking with you about it because I have a lot of passion about it. My kids do go to public schools. I am somebody who I don't just invest. I shouldn't say that. I don't just investigate public schools. I also live it. I got my kids in public school, so I'm living this every single day. I'm not like many of our superintendents who don't send their own kids to public schools. I do. Like, my kids go to these local public schools, and I'm proud that they do. So I have a stake in this, and I want our public schools to do better. I know that they can, and I don't think that it's that difficult of a thing to do. We have seen around the country, examples that didn't take 20 or 25 years to turn things around. It can be done fairly quickly, but it all comes down to us.
And the parents got to push.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it has been wonderful. Thank you so, so much for joining us. And with that, I am going to say goodbye to all the viewers and thank you until next week. All right.